with AB not being in the lineup tonight.
Yeah, to go along with this impressive play in the first half, she's obviously having a great season, is 5 turnovers. And I bring that up.
Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. Sunday's game had one absolutely ridiculous moment. Caitlin Clark was cooking at halftime, putting up 18 points, 7 assists, and a +7, while Indiana was only down 1. And here's the damn problem. When Clark left the floor, the offense basically went completely dead. She was carrying the hell out of this team, creating everything and keeping them alive. So how the hell does anyone watch that and pretend she wasn't dominating? The numbers were screaming it. Clark was controlling the game, and the critics looking for excuses looked absolutely clueless. Mid-highlight tape. Let's take a listen.
Michaela Timpson doing a great job making herself available with AB not being in the lineup.
Yeah, to go along with this impressive play in the first half, she's obviously having a great season, is 5 turnovers. And I bring that up. She has 6 assists, 5 turnovers. Those 5 turnovers, Chicago has turned into points on the other side. So that's where you want your point guard to stay aggressive, which she's doing a great job of playmaking, but find a way to limit those turnovers at the same time.
Yeah, listen, and she plays really well against Chicago. She's averaged so far 29 points, 10 assists in the first couple of meetings they've had so far this season.
The worst part about this entire conversation is that when you actually look at what happened, the damn numbers completely destroy the narrative. Caitlin Clark had 5 turnovers, and somehow that became the headline while everything else she did was pushed into the background. And I'm sorry, but that is one hell of a convenient way to tell the story, because from those turnovers, Chicago scored only 2 points. 2! That's it. And 4 of those 5 turnovers were dead ball turnovers. So when somebody sits there and throws around 5 turnovers like Caitlin Clark was handing Chicago the damn game, that is completely misleading. One of the turnovers that supposedly became part of this big criticism happened after Elizabeth Williams went for a steal, missed, and scratched Clark's arm. You could literally see the mark on Caitlin's arm afterward. Clark was pointing at her arm because there was a massive scratch down it, and then Chicago gets the layup. So what exactly are we doing here? Are we seriously going to pretend Caitlin Clark was just recklessly throwing the ball all over the damn court and gifting Chicago points? Because that is not what happened. And this is where Sue Bird comes into the conversation. Sue Bird, Susie Bird, Suzanne Bird, the longtime UConn star and longtime basketball personality, brought up Clark's turnovers during the broadcast. And this is exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about when I say the Caitlin Clark turnover conversation has become completely predictable. Clark was having an incredible first half. She had 18 points, she had 7 assists, or 6 assists, depending on which portion of the broadcast you're looking at, and she was keeping Indiana competitive. The Fever were down only 1 point at halftime, and Caitlin Clark was a massive reason they were even in that position. But instead of focusing on the damn performance, Sue Bird immediately went toward the turnovers. 5 turnovers. There it is. That's the talking point. And look, I'm not saying turnovers don't matter. Of course they matter. Point guards need to protect the basketball. Caitlin Clark herself would probably tell you she needs to clean some of that up. But context matters. If you are going to mention 5 turnovers, then tell the entire damn story. Tell people Chicago only converted those turnovers into 2 points. Tell people 4 of them were dead ball turnovers. Tell people one of the sequences involved Elizabeth Williams making contact with Clark and leaving a visible scratch on her arm. Tell people Caitlin Clark was still responsible for 18 points and 7 assists in the first half. That changes the entire damn conversation. And this is why I get so frustrated when people bring up turnovers without context. They aren't necessarily lying about the number, they're just presenting the number in a way that creates a completely different impression. It's like saying a player scored 18 points, but leaving out that they also had 7 assists. You're technically mentioning a statistic, but you're deliberately leaving out the part that matters. And Caitlin Clark wasn't just scoring, she was creating, she was distributing, she was making plays, she was keeping Indiana alive. Kelsey Mitchell struggled badly in the first half, and that isn't personal criticism of Kelsey. Shooters have bad halves. That's basketball. Even elite scorers can go cold. Kelsey is less streaky than many pure shooters, but she can still have those stretches where the shots simply aren't falling. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark was doing everything. And thankfully, Michaela Timpson was helping too. Michaela Timpson was making herself available, finishing plays, and giving Indiana another offensive option with Aaliyah Boston out of the lineup. That mattered. So when Cheryl Miller was talking about Michaela Timpson and complimenting the way Caitlin Clark was playing, that was the actual context of the moment. Clark was putting on a show. Then Sue Bird comes in with the turnover reminder. Here's what she said. She's obviously having a great season. She has 6 assists, 5 turnovers. And then she talked about Chicago turning those turnovers into points and said Caitlin needed to find a way to limit them while staying aggressive. Again, nobody is saying Caitlin Clark should ignore turnovers, but why is the emphasis always on the damn mistake? Why isn't the emphasis on what she created? Why isn't the conversation about 18 points and 7 assists? Why isn't the conversation about the fact that she was the primary reason Indiana was still within 1 possession at halftime? Why isn't the conversation about Michaela Timpson benefiting from Caitlin Clark's playmaking? Why isn't the conversation about the fact that Chicago didn't exactly dominate Indiana in the turnover battle either? That is the part that drives me crazy, because this has become the same damn script over and over again. Caitlin Clark turns the ball over, turnovers. Caitlin Clark misses a few threes, she can't shoot. Caitlin Clark has a bad game, see, she's overrated. But when Caitlin Clark dominates, suddenly everybody needs to find something else to complain about. And that's why the turnover criticism feels so damn selective. Sue Bird has every right to analyze Caitlin Clark. She's a basketball legend, and nobody is saying she isn't allowed to criticize her game. But if you're going to criticize her, at least give the audience the complete picture. Because 5 turnovers sounds awful. 5 turnovers leading to 2 points sounds completely different. And that distinction matters. The reality is that Caitlin Clark was the engine of the Fever offense in that first half. She was scoring, creating, passing, and forcing Chicago to defend her constantly. And that's the part that gets lost when people obsess over one statistic. The haters want the number, 5 turnovers. Fine, but give us the rest of the damn numbers too. 18 points, 6 or 7 assists, a team down only 1 point, Chicago converting those turnovers into just 2 points, Michaela Timpson going 4 for 4 and contributing 8 points, Kelsey Mitchell struggling early before potentially finding her rhythm later. That is the actual story, not Caitlin Clark had 5 turnovers. The actual story is that Caitlin Clark was doing almost everything possible to keep Indiana in the game, and somehow the conversation became about the mistakes. At some point, you have to stop repeating the same tired crap and actually analyze the game. Because if 5 turnovers are worth mentioning, then 18 points and 7 assists are sure as hell worth mentioning too. And when the turnovers you're complaining about produce only 2 points, maybe, just maybe, the turnover narrative isn't as devastating as people desperately want you to believe.
So I want to take a step back for a second, because if we're going to talk about Caitlin Clark's turnovers, then let's actually talk about turnovers instead of throwing around one damn number and pretending that settles the entire argument. Look at the NBA all-time turnover leaders: LeBron James, Russell Westbrook, Karl Malone, James Harden, John Stockton, Kobe Bryant, Jason Kidd, Moses Malone, Kevin Durant, Isaiah Thomas, Akeem Olajuwon, Patrick Ewing, Paul Pierce, Magic Johnson, Reggie Theus, Steve Nash. And we could keep going. Tim Duncan, Charles Barkley, Dwayne Wade, Shaquille O'Neal, Steph Curry, Dwight Howard, Allen Iverson, Scottie Pippen, Robert Parrish, Kevin Garnett, Mark Jackson, Andre Miller, Chris Paul, Carmelo Anthony. You know what a hell of a lot of those players have in common? They're Hall of Famers. And the guys who aren't already in the Hall of Fame? Many are future Hall of Famers. So when somebody screams, "Oh my God, this player has too many turnovers," my response is simple. Yeah, and? Because here's the part people conveniently forget. Those players weren't turning the ball over because they were sitting in the corner doing absolutely nothing. They had the ball. They were creating. They were handling pressure. They were making difficult passes. They were attacking defenses. They were responsible for creating offense for everybody else. And when you're the person doing that, you're going to have more opportunities to make mistakes. That's called risk and reward. You can't have the ball in your hands constantly, attempt difficult passes, create open shots for teammates, attack defenses, and simultaneously expect to have 0 turnovers. That's not how basketball works. And if you want to look at per-game numbers, fine, let's do that too. Trae Young, Luka Doncic, Russell Westbrook, Magic Johnson, Isaiah Thomas, John Wall, James Harden, Allen Iverson, Steve Francis, LeBron James, Reggie Theus, Joel Embiid, Michael Ray Richardson, DeMarcus Cousins, Ray Williams, Bernard King, Kevin Durant, Gilbert Arenas, Dwayne Wade, Charles Barkley, Larry freaking Bird, Steph Curry, Julius Erving. You see the pattern? Some of the greatest players in basketball history had high turnover rates. Why? Because they were doing shit. They were carrying offensive responsibilities. They were trying to make plays. They were taking risks that ordinary players weren't taking. And that's exactly where Caitlin Clark comes into this conversation. Yes, turnovers matter. Of course they do. Nobody is arguing that turnovers are good, but context matters just as much. The question isn't simply how many turnovers did Caitlin Clark have? The question is, what did Caitlin Clark give the team in exchange for those risks? Because if a player has 5 turnovers but gives you 18 points, 7 assists, creates opportunities all over the floor, stretches the defense, and keeps your team in the damn game, you can't evaluate that performance by staring at the turnover column like it's the only number on the scoreboard. That's ridiculous. And here's another thing people don't seem to understand. Different players have different responsibilities. Take Kelsey Mitchell. Kelsey is a scorer. That's incredibly valuable. But because scoring is her primary responsibility, Indiana needs other players around her who can handle the ball, create opportunities, defend, rebound, and do the things necessary to maximize her scoring. That's how team basketball works. You build around strengths and cover weaknesses. The same thing applies to Caitlin Clark. Clark is a creator. She's going to attempt passes other players wouldn't even see. She's going to throw the ball into spaces where most players wouldn't even think about putting it. Sometimes those passes work and you get an incredible highlight. Sometimes they don't. That's the damn trade-off. You can't demand the spectacular playmaking and then scream bloody murder every time one of those high-difficulty attempts doesn't work. It's intellectually dishonest. And we have seen this exact thing in other sports. Look at NFL quarterbacks. Guys like Brett Favre and John Elway were called gunslingers for a reason. They weren't afraid to make aggressive throws. Sometimes those throws resulted in interceptions. But nobody remembers Brett Favre simply as the guy who threw interceptions. They remember the championships, the big throws, the longevity, the Hall of Fame career, and the willingness to make plays when the game was on the line. That's risk and reward. And Caitlin Clark plays a similar style. Her basketball IQ is so damn high that she actually avoids a lot of unnecessary risks. But she does take chances, and those chances are part of what makes her special. Now, let's get back to Sue Bird, because this is where the conversation gets interesting. Sue Bird is absolutely entitled to criticize Caitlin Clark. She's a basketball legend. She's entitled to her opinion. But when she highlights 5 turnovers without giving the complete context, that's exactly why people are going to question the analysis. Because the casual viewer hears, Caitlin Clark had 5 turnovers, and they immediately think, damn, she must have played terribly. But that's not what happened. She had 18 points and 6 or 7 assists at halftime. Indiana was down only 1, and Chicago reportedly converted those 5 turnovers into only 2 points. That's a completely different story. And then there's another important detail. Caitlin Clark didn't have another turnover in the second half. Not one. So the player being criticized for 5 turnovers at halftime finished the game without adding another one. And some of those first half turnovers were reportedly dropped passes. That's another problem with the way these numbers get presented. We've seen this happen before. Caitlin can put a pass directly into a teammate's hands, the teammate drops it, and somehow the box score says Caitlin Clark turnover. Well, technically, yes, but anyone watching the play understands the context, and that's why raw statistics can sometimes be incredibly misleading. You have to watch the game. You have to understand the role. You have to understand the circumstances. You have to understand what the player is attempting to accomplish. And that brings us to the bigger issue. Caitlin Clark has been producing statistics at a ridiculous pace. Look at the 30-point, 10-assist games. The entire WNBA's history had 4 before Clark started piling them up. Caitlin Clark has already reached that mark 5 times in roughly 2 seasons. Think about that. Not 5 times by one other player. The entire damn league had 4. Every player, every season, every game. 30 years of WNBA history. 4 games. Then Caitlin Clark comes along and does it 5 times in roughly 2 seasons. That's not normal. And then you look at the 20-point, 10-assist games. Caitlin is already up there with an absurd number of performances, while players ahead of her or near her took hundreds of games to accumulate those totals. That's the context people don't want to discuss, because if you focus on the historic production, the turnover argument becomes a hell of a lot weaker. So instead, they keep grabbing the same damn statistic. 5 turnovers, 5 turnovers, 5 turnovers. Fine, let's talk about all 5. Let's talk about how many became points. Let's talk about the dead ball turnovers. Let's talk about the dropped passes. Let's talk about the scratch from Elizabeth Williams. Let's talk about the 18 points. Let's talk about the 7 assists. Let's talk about the fact that Caitlin Clark didn't turn the ball over again in the second half. Let's talk about the fact that she was keeping Indiana alive. That's the complete story. And that's ultimately what bothers me about this whole debate. It's not that Sue Bird mentioned turnovers, it's that the turnover conversation gets presented as though it's some devastating indictment of Caitlin Clark. It isn't. Turnovers are part of the price of being an aggressive playmaker. If Caitlin starts playing scared because people are obsessed with her turnover count, then you lose the very thing that makes her dangerous. I'd rather have Caitlin Clark aggressively creating offense than turn her into a damn passive point guard who refuses to make difficult plays just so some analyst can look at the box score and say, wow, 0 turnovers. Give me the player who takes the risk. Give me the player who sees the pass nobody else sees. Give me the player who can score, facilitate, stretch the defense, and completely change the way opponents have to defend. And if 5 turnovers come with that, then evaluate the entire damn performance, because that's basketball. And that's the context that gets lost every single time somebody wants to turn Caitlin Clark's turnover number into the headline. So yes, turnovers matter, but so do points, so do assists, so does efficiency, so does playmaking, so does impact, and most importantly, so does winning. Stop looking at one column and pretending you've explained the entire player. That's not analysis, that's just bullshit. Tell me what you think. Don't forget, like and subscribe.